The Chinese Communist Party, CCP, is currently playing a dangerously provocative game in the South China Sea. They have used Coast Guard ships, maritime militia vessels, and water cannons to attack Philippine supply ships. Their goal is to prevent the Philippines from delivering supplies to the soldiers stranded on the World War II landing ship grounded on Ren'ai Reef, also known as the Second Thomas Shoal or the Ayungin Shoal. Despite the CCP's boasting about the strength of its naval forces, a recent incident has left them thoroughly embarrassed. The Philippine Coast Guard rammed into a Chinese Coast Guard vessel number 4103, leaving several holes in its hull. Chinese netizens say that although the actual damage caused by this collision was not significant, it greatly humiliated the CCP as it questions the quality and durability of Chinese Coast Guard ships. The Philippine Armed Forces stated on X, at 8:38 a.m., the Philippine supply vessel Unaiza May 4 was subjected to direct water cannoning by two CCG vessels near Ayungin Shoal. The UM-4 supply boat sustained heavy damages at around 8:52 due to the continued blasting of water cannons from the CCG vessels. Although this collision did not affect the operation of the Chinese Coast Guard ship, the CCP did not miss the opportunity to accuse the Philippine vessels of violating the international regulations for preventing collisions at sea. The maritime collisions have always been a matter of great concern, and this incident has caused a huge stir. Why is this? It is reported that the Philippine vessel BRP Sindangan is a well-known protagonist in the Ren'ai Reef conflict. The ship is a patrol boat of the Philippines Parola class, built by Japan Marine United Corporation, JMU, with a displacement of 321 tons, a length of 44.5 meters, and a width of 7.5 meters. It was delivered to the Philippines in 2017 for national use. On the other hand, Chinese Coast Guard 4103 was once a 056 type missile frigate belonging to the Chinese Navy. This ship has a full load displacement of 1,440 tons, a length of 88.9 meters, and a width of 11.14 meters. From 2013 to 2016, a total of 22 such ships were built. After 2021, these ships were stripped of their air defense missiles, torpedo launchers, and anti-ship missiles, and converted into patrol vessels for service in the Chinese Coast Guard. The 4103 in this incident was originally named Weihai and was commissioned in 2014. From these facts, we can see the huge difference in size and equipment between these two vessels. The fact that a Philippine patrol boat poked several holes in a missile frigate casts doubt on the quality of Chinese naval vessels. It is important to note that the Philippine Coast Guard vessel has not undergone any modifications, yet it was able to puncture holes in the iron shell of a Chinese military vessel due to an unintentional inertial movement. This should serve as a warning that Chinese military vessels are not as sturdy as imagined. If deliberate high-speed collisions were to occur, it could lead to serious damage or even complete incapacitation of their combat capabilities. This also explains why the Chinese Coast Guard accused the Philippines of having armed fishermen, because as long as the front of Filipino fishing boats is equipped with hard iron armor, anyone could ram a hole into a Chinese Coast Guard ship. Despite the CCP's claims of having constructed large tonnage Coast Guard ships with stronger armor, recent events have shown otherwise. The puncture incident suggests that the current Chinese vessels may not be as durable as claimed. This incident also highlights a larger issue. Maybe all types of current Chinese naval vessels have the same vulnerability to collisions. The South China Sea is a vital shipping lane worth over $3 trillion annually, and apart from China and the Philippines, Taiwan, Brunei, Malaysia, and Vietnam all claim sovereignty over parts of it. Beijing claims sovereignty over nearly the entire South China Sea, based on the 9-dash line, and has disregarded the 2016 Permanent Court of Arbitration ruling. It continues land reclamation, Coast Guard ships, and armed militia vessels to obstruct other countries' operations, and uses water cannons, lasers, and collisions to disrupt supply and fishing activities. The territorial dispute between China and the Philippines in the South China Sea has been ongoing for many years. As early as April 2012, the two sides confronted each other near Huangyan Island for several months. However, in the past year, the conflict seems to have been escalating. In February last year, A Chinese vessel used military-grade lasers to target a Philippine supply ship, temporarily blinding Filipino crew members. In the second half of this year, Chinese Coast Guard vessels repeatedly used water cannons to attack Philippine vessels. The situation has been deteriorating rapidly. China's provocative actions in the South China Sea have alarmed the United States. This aggressive stance has put immense pressure on Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos, who is now allied with the West. When Marcos took office as president in 2022, he received support from China. However, China's aggressive actions in the South China Sea forced him to change his stance. China's expansionist actions at sea have also angered the Filipino people. On April 9th, Filipino protesters held a demonstration outside the Chinese consulate in the Philippines. Photos from Reuters and other media outlets showed protesters stomping on and tearing apart a portrait of Chinese leader Xi Jinping. They shouted, "China, get out," and accused China of blatant aggression against Philippine sovereignty. One of the protest leaders, Mong Palatino, stated that they wanted to send a clear message to the Chinese government to comply with the 2016 South China Sea arbitration ruling. This ruling determined that China's sovereignty claim over almost the entire South China Sea is baseless, and they demanded that China stop harassing Filipino fishermen and government supply missions. According to the Wall Street Journal, the international community is concerned about the escalating tensions, fearing they could lead to a serious event. This could prompt the Philippines to invoke the Mutual Defense Treaty signed with the United States, escalating the China-Philippines conflict into a broader one. Consequently, President Joe Biden has held the first Trilateral summit in Washington with President Marcos and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, with the South China Sea issue being one of the key agenda items. Admiral John Aquilino, commander of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, condemned China's actions against the Philippines as aggressive, dangerous, and provocative. He pointed out that the Philippines is a long-standing military ally and treaty ally of the United States. If China were to launch any attacks on Philippine government vessels and aircraft in the South China Sea, resulting in casualties, the Philippines would have the right to invoke the U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty. It is believed that the United States, while willing to confront China's deliberate provocations against countries with significantly weaker military capabilities, is not willing to engage in direct confrontation with China. Since November last year, the military forces of the United States and the Philippines have conducted joint patrols in the South China Sea. Whenever the Philippine supply fleet heads to Ren'ai Reef, a U.S. warship usually appears nearby. Although the U.S. warship does not directly engage in the dispute between the two sides, it remains within sight of both Chinese and Filipino vessels. Currently, the U.S. strategy is to cooperate with allies to demonstrate the support for Philippines and to deter China. On April 7th, warships and aircraft from the United States, Japan, Australia, and the Philippines conducted joint maritime exercises in the South China Sea. This joint military exercise signifies the support of the U.S., Japan, and Australia for the Philippines, and strengthened the joint operational capabilities of the four countries at sea, in the air, and among their naval forces. The Philippines sent its nearshore patrol ship, BRP Pilar, and destroyer BRP Alcaraz to participate in this exercise. Japan sent its destroyer, JS Akebono, Australia sent its frigate, HMAS Warren, and the U.S. sent its littoral combat ship, USS Mobile. On April 8th, the U.S. and Philippine armies conducted the Balikatan joint exercise. The Air Forces conducted the Lightning Clash exercise, and the Marines also conducted joint exercises, all aimed at enhancing the two countries' joint readiness capabilities. Meanwhile, on April 7th, the Chinese military's Southern Theater Command organized joint air and sea patrols in the area to counter the military exercises of the U.S., Japan, Australia, and the Philippines. The fact that both sides conducted military exercises on the same day indicates that the South China Sea dispute has escalated from a confrontation between Coast Guard forces to quasi-military confrontation. This escalation has garnered intense attention from the international community. Additionally, on April 11th, President Biden held the first ever U.S.-Japan-Philippines Trilateral Summit in Washington. In his opening speech at the summit, President Biden stated that the U.S.'s defense commitments to Pacific allies, such as Japan and the Philippines, are rock solid. He also stated that any attack by China on Philippine aircraft, ships, or armed forces in the South China Sea would trigger the U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty. After the summit, the three countries issued a joint statement expressing serious concern about China's dangerous actions in the South China Sea and also expressed serious concerns about the situation in the East China Sea. This dynamic suggests that the situation in the South China Sea may further escalate. Some analysts believe that the U.S. hopes to use this opportunity to redefine its geopolitical role in the South China Sea to counter China's attempt to exclude the U.S. from the security disputes in the region and strengthen the legitimacy of its involvement. In fact, China has always tried to exclude the U.S. from the South China Sea, denying its presence in the region. However, now, as the U.S., Japan, and Philippines gear up, the importance of the U.S. in South China Sea security affairs can be highlighted, demonstrating a close link between South China Sea security and U.S. national security. To address and counter China's expansion, the U.S. may consider devising a series of contingency and operational plans spanning Hawaii and Guam to the northern part of Taiwan, the southern part of Taiwan, and the Philippines. After the summit, joint military exercises involving two or even multiple countries may be planned to strengthen future response plans. China's expansion is a result of its increased economic power in recent years. Alliances between the U.S. and countries such as Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, and Taiwan serve only as a simple island chain defense. It is also necessary to contain China's expansion economically and technologically. China's actions in the South China Sea and East China Sea have put pressure on Japan, especially after the Taiwan election, when Chinese military aircraft frequently crossed the median line of the strait, increasing military pressure on Taiwan. Therefore, Japan is proactively enhancing its preparedness for future warfare. It is believed that under the framework of U.S.-Japan security, Japan will seek more guarantees at the U.S.-Japan summit, including combat exercises, intelligence sharing, and command coordination. Currently, Japan has planned to strengthen the defense capabilities of its southwestern remote islands, with Yonaguni Island being the primary focus of this plan. The island is about 2,000 kilometers from Tokyo and only 110 kilometers from Taiwan. To enhance its retaliatory capacity, Japan also signed an agreement with the United States in January to purchase up to 400 Tomahawk cruise missiles for 254 billion yen, $1.6 billion US, with plans to gradually deploy them on its Maritime Self-Defense Forces Aegis-class destroyers starting from 2025. Additionally, U.S. forces stationed in Japan demonstrated how to operate the Tomahawk system for the first time on March 28th at the Yokosuka base in Kanagawa Prefecture. Ma Junwei, an associate professor of international affairs at Taiwan's Tamkang University, said that after China's military reform, there has been an expansionist trend in the East China Sea, or the Western Pacific, and other countries need to respond. Japan, because of the U.S. military bases in Okinawa, would be implicated in the event of a war in the Taiwan Strait, which would be considered an attack on Japan's homeland. So the U.S. and Japan would make corresponding military preparations. He said, "This is actually a kind of preventative defense." In the U.S.-Japan alliance, the self-defense forces of Japan play the role of a collaborator. However, the outcome of this year's U.S. election may bring some changes. If Biden is elected, the policy may be relatively stable. If Trump is re-elected, the U.S. may continue its unilateralist approach, leading to a decline in relations with allies. Therefore, Japan must be prepared to deal with any possible situation. It is worth noting that in the event of a sudden change in the South China Sea crisis, more foreign troops may be stationed in the South China Sea, which would undoubtedly pose a serious threat to China. Earlier this year, the Philippines and Canada signed a memorandum of understanding on defense cooperation, laying the groundwork for a future agreement on the deployment of troops between the two countries. Philippine Defense Secretary Gilberto Teodoro expressed satisfaction with both parties' intent to enhance defense relations, viewing it as a significant step forward that could potentially lead to the establishment of a visiting forces agreement. Teodoro did not disclose the possible contents of the agreement, but the Philippine Department of Defense stated that the memorandum would promote cooperation between the defense and military institutions of the two countries in military education, training exchanges, information sharing, peacekeeping operations, and disaster relief. In October last year, the Philippines and Canada signed a cooperation agreement aimed at using Canada's dark ship detection system to combat illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing activities, as well as to shut down vessels using locator transmitters to evade detection. The system will also enhance the Philippines' monitoring of its territorial waters and exclusive economic zone, particularly in areas of tension with China over sovereignty disputes in the South China Sea. Recently, after Philippine President Marcos concluded his visit in the United States, an international press conference was held in Manila, where the Philippines showed its final card to China. Regarding the sovereignty dispute between the Philippines and China in the South China Sea, Marcos said, "If Philippine soldiers are killed in a foreign attack, the U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty will be triggered." He pointed out that even if the attack is carried out by non-military entities, such as Coast Guard departments or civilian ships, if Philippine soldiers are killed, the Philippines will request the U.S. to take military action in response. In addition, regarding the Balikatan joint military exercises between the U.S. and the Philippines, scheduled for April 22nd to May 10th, Marcos said that this is a regular joint exercise between the two countries. The scale this year is comparable to last year's over 17,000 participants, includes observers from several countries, including Japan. Marcos revealed that at the recent Trilateral summit between the U.S., Japan, and the Philippines in Washington, agreement was reached on creating a tripartite exercise for humanitarian aid and disaster response, and the Japanese Self-Defense Forces will join the exercise next year. He also pointed out that this year's first-ever cybersecurity assurance and command control training will be the most complex and largest-scale exercise. To counter the danger posed by China, Philippine authorities have confirmed that they will purchase more ships, radars, and aircraft for territorial defense. Philippine Chief of Staff Romeo Bronner stated that the Philippines will improve the facilities on its existing 9 islands and reefs to make them suitable for military deployment and living. The U.S. Indo-Pacific Command also confirmed on April 15th that the U.S. had deployed a ground-based mobile missile system called Typhoon to the northern Philippines in the first island chain. The range of this system not only covers the entire Taiwan Strait and the Luzon Strait, but also can strike important Chinese coastal cities such as Shanghai, Guangzhou, and People Liberation Army bases in the South China Sea. This is the first appearance of the Typhoon system in the Indo-Pacific region and the first time the U.S. has deployed medium-range, land-based missiles in the region since the end of the Cold War. It is also the first deployment of such weapons by the U.S. since the expiration of the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty in 2019. The U.S. stance is evident. In addition, India has explicitly stated its support for the Philippines in the South China Sea issue. Indian Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar emphasized India's support for the Philippines in maintaining national sovereignty during his visit to the Philippines, demonstrating India's position on the South China Sea issue. The India-China border dispute has also been ongoing. The two countries had a major border conflict in 1962, and the clash in the eastern Ladakh region in 2020 also resulted in casualties. Nevertheless, the two countries' militaries have held several rounds of talks and agreed to maintain dialogue through military and diplomatic channels. Experts point out that India's support for the Philippines indicates regional unity in the face of Chinese provocations. India is clearly aware that it must not stand alone in the event of a conflict with China. Overall, China's military expansion and provocative actions are affecting the security situation in the entire Indo-Pacific region. Currently, the U.S.'s freedom of navigation is also being somewhat disrupted, mainly due to China's activities in the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean.